earners, that they will provide a generous risk allowance for frontline workers, and that they will guarantee all households a minimum livable income. We know he would not. In the budget debate, we in the opposition will again not only identify defects and deficiencies in the 2024 budget, but to present an alternative vision and development plan for Guyana. Our vision is based on a different way of thinking about Guyana and its people. As we have repeatedly declared, our people-centered vision puts people first. One, we see it as the moral obligation of any serious government to raise the quality of life of all citizens. In fact, it is the fundamental reason why a government exists. Two, we see it as respecting and honoring the people's human and constitutional right to a good life. And three, we see it as good economic policy, as direct investments in people's well-being can further energize and boost the economy. As we present our case to the people during the debate, we are confident Guyanese will see that we in the opposition care more for them and their families. We will stand with Guyanese in rejecting the existence of two Guyanas, one for the PPP elite, friends, families, and favorites, and another for everyone else. We will demonstrate to Guyanese that we stand for equity and shared prosperity. The 2024 budget presentation, therefore, will be the same old PPP demonstration of crony capitalism, bricks and mortar projects, and political gimmickry. If the PPP was bad pre-2015, they are even worse now. Luckily, with elections on the horizon, this is either the PPP's last or second to last government budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will take questions on the press statement, and of course, we'll do so by the raise of hand and your media house. I will go with Ms. Svetlana, who is in house.
Svetlana Good day, Svetlana Marshall from News Source. Mr. Norton, you spoke about a series of measures the opposition would like to see implemented, and you also referenced to a cost of living allowance to government workers. Is there a figure you would float at this moment, and the reduction of VAT? What percentage you think it should be at going forward? And also, for persons who are not within the public sector, what's your thought, or what's the opposition's position on cash transfer? I see that some of the unions are still pushing for cash transfer to every single household utilizing resources from the oil revenues.
Let me state that I believe every household should get living assistance as well as cash grants in a structured way. We are not in opposition to cash grants. We're in opposition to the fact that it is unstructured, it is inadequate, and it is not done in a way that there can be the requisite accountability. People moving around in a truck or a bus with money and doling it out cannot be the way a government operates. So I would say no to that. In terms of VAT, I think at minimum, you can reduce it by 2%. If we're exposed to all the information, we probably can do more. But I do believe that if we do a reduction in VAT, it will help the Guyanese people, assuming that it will be passed on. And sometimes, it isn't. I think that's... It should be to all Guyanese, in all Guyanese households. I don't see us giving a cost of living allowance to the government employees and none to the non-government employees, because we are all facing the same high cost of living. And so when we talk about cost of living, we know the government could afford it and can give it to all Guyanese households. And I'm stating households because it can be cash grants to individuals. but it should be to households because you want to cushion the cost of living for the household. But they can't do it like how they did COVID because they were very discriminatory in their approach to COVID cash grants, in which they, while they were dealing with PPP strongholds, they were dealing with households. And the minute they arrive in APNU, AFC stronghold, and you weren't PPP, then they ask you for ownership of the house and a lot of garbage. It has to be structured, fair, and transparent.
Just to add a bit of texture as well to those remarks by the leader, we've observed, first of all, that the US State Department indicated inflation last year was 6.6%. So obviously, we're still experiencing a period of high prices, and I don't need to tell the average Guyanese that. When it comes to a cost of living adjustment, we've previously indicated that in 2022 you had that additional unexpected $60 billion that was never properly distributed, was never made use of. We again want to reiterate that's $300,000 per household, and that would easily be a starting place when it comes to a cost of living adjustment. In addition to that, we want to mention that typically when countries are looking at these types of adjustments, they look at the minimum wage level and they look at the inflation rate, and they try to ensure that households are able to receive a compensation such that they can cover at least that rate of inflation, so that at least your spending power, your purchasing power is the same as it was the previous year. That's a minimum level. And so that should give you an idea of the finances available. In addition, we observed that tens of billions of dollars were brought in from VAT. And so a reduction in VAT of 2% is very much on the cards, given that the government budget has soared and that there's a lot of space there for those types of adjustments. That is what we've been saying all along, is that is a windfall the government never distributed to the Guyanese people, which was as a result of the higher oil price due to the war in Ukraine.
See the hand of Miss Triana Williams. We see that your stuff is moving, but we have no sound coming from you, Miss Williams. Any other questions on the press statement?
Mr. Norton, what would be your assessment of government's implementation of the 2023 budget?
You just have to drive around the country and see most of the projects are not completed. If you go to the estimates in the parliament, the estimates that are produced, if you go to the section of youth, sport, and culture, you would see they put completion of the track and field, the track in region 10 and 6. None of the two, not one has been completed. And as you move around, the school at Bamia is there since 2020 or 2021. It hasn't been completed. Right out here, if you go from public road with this widening of through Prashad Nagar, you would see it is not completed. And this is just in this little location. Across the country, the projects aren't being completed. It was pointed out that we lack the capacity to deliver on those projects. And the government went ahead because they want to talk about the biggest, largest budget. They want to look as if they're doing something. So you're ending up with poor quality and in many cases, incomplete projects.
Ms. Williams, is your audio back in? Any other questions on the press statement? I'll give you the first vote. Then you read.
Mr. Norton, over yesterday and today, we saw reports about your reshuffling of your shadow cabinet, reference made to MP Figuera and his dissatisfaction, it would appear, about the reassignment, his portfolio for culture, youth, and sport being reassigned to someone else. And information suggests as well that natural resources or the oil and gas industry has been reassigned to another MP. There's also concern that MPs were not consulted on this move. What's your response?
From the time I became opposition leader, I've been reviewing the situation. At the last budget, when I spoke with MPs, we agreed then that we will look at all the portfolios. And in fact, at the last budget, we identify areas that though somebody was not a shadow minister, they also covered. This talk about not engaging MPs and what they should do is not true. When I became opposition leader, right in the hall up here, I sat with all the MPs and we agreed and produced a document on what needs to be done by every MP. So there's a clear guide. Now, there are a number of issues that had to be dealt with. As leader of the opposition, I had to deal with it. Let me give you an example. As I sit in the parliament, issues came up on home affairs. The shadow minister is Gita Chandan. But the person who has all the information and the plans that occurred in the ministry is Kemraj Ramchadan. Now, what I did is to make Kemraj the shadow minister, him from agriculture. And even though he will be the shadow minister, and Gita Chandan will now be governance and parliamentary affairs, in budget assignments, she will also be speaking on home affairs because she was. But it gives us the opportunity to bring institutional knowledge. The same is true with Patterson. Patterson served as infrastructure minister, which is now public works. If you follow in the press, etc., you will see a lot of the key responses would come from Patterson. So what I said, and I discussed it with Patterson, you have the knowledge for infrastructure. I'll move you to infrastructure. But you will also continue to speak on oil and gas, though you're a shadow minister. Public works. Now, there is a false view. There's no shadow minister oil and gas. As I understand the system, you shadow a minister. There is no oil and gas minister. There's a minister of natural resources. And so Patterson is placed in public works. And I made it clear in the members of parliament meeting, he will continue to engage and speak on oil and gas because he's researching it, he knows it. But I also made the point that we end up treating natural resources like if it is only oil and gas. But there is mining. You got forestry. You have a number of areas in natural resources that need to be addressed. We mine out areas in Linden, in Region 7, 8. But do we have an approach to regaining those lands that we would have mined out? That is an issue for me that has to be addressed. But if you leave it only in the context of oil and gas, that wouldn't be addressed. And so, like I said to members of parliament, since last budget, the focus cannot be solely on oil and gas. Some people will want that to be the sole focus, but you will neglect coal, you will neglect forestry, and that shouldn't happen. And so it is in that context Patterson came where he is. Now, Coretta McDonald has been moved to education. I think it should be obvious to all why she is being moved to education. She's being moved to education because she's knowledgeable of education. She is involved, and she will bring a lot of experience and information to bear. Then Natasha Singh Lewis, who was in education, has been moved to social services. Units that she will perform better in social services for a number of reasons. And then you have youth, sport, and culture, where there are a lot of grounds unfinished across this country. A lot of work should be done in youth, sport, and culture, needs to be done. And I thought in the circumstance, we need an activist oriented person there who is involved in sport. And that naturally led to Nima Flubes. And it is on that basis the decision was taken to put Nima Flubes in the area of youth, sport, and culture. And like all the others who would have moved, like I said, though Gita is moving from Home Affairs to governance, she can speak on matters. The same is true about Figueroa. He has responsibility for Region 10, he's the regional MP, and he can address youth, sport, and culture. But the shadow minister, the person who will shadow it, will be Nemo Flubes. You know, somebody called me this morning and said only when they read the article they recognized that Figueroa was the youth, sport, and culture shadow minister. Yeah.
It's being alleged that Mr. Figueroa's removal from that shadow ministry is in part as a result of his approach to your handshaking policy, or the decision not to shake the hands of the president, and he would have done that in the past. What do you say to that?
There was never handshaking policy in the. All right, no, I'm saying there was never handshaking policy. I said at the time when I didn't shake the president's hand, I wasn't going to shake the hand of the president. And I held to that. I have never instructed or said to any member of parliament they should not shake the president's hands. And if they want to deal with the reality, since that incident, the president and I met at the Seventh-day Adventist church activity. And all and sundry will tell you I shook his hand because I thought that was an environment in which we should. Now, I have seen Roysdale Ford. I think I've seen a Manza. I've seen many MPs shook the president's hand, and not one of them could say I called them and tell them anything about shaking the president's hands. My symbolic non-shaking of the president's hand was to signal that it is not business as usual. And I can just give you a photo up. And that is what it is. It has nothing to do. The whole purpose of reshuffling is to make us more effective and efficient as members of parliament. And I think also it provides the opportunity for those regional MPs to do more work in their regions.
Okay, Ms. Davina, you'll have to start over because we weren't hearing you when you started.
What's the question?
Ms. Davina, we are not hearing you clearly. Is it the case that you can turn up your volume?
She has, I think,
I'm hearing you now, but you're very low. Good. Yes,
yes,
better.
I will repeat just what I said the last two times I spoke on this matter. I believe we need our own meters so that we can monitor and know what is happening. We should not rely on Exxon to give us information. To me, that is unacceptable. I've said that before. I want to make it clear here again. Now, on the question of full of coverage, again, we said we had agreed with the judge ruling and that it should be put in place. I repeat it again. It's like ring fencing. I've said here we believe in the principle of ring fencing. I said it in the last press conference. I said it in about 4 press conferences before. But it is put over as if I said no to ring fencing. I said we believe in ring fencing, but we have to look at specific cases rather than generalizing. I repeat the same thing again. Look at what?
some factors.
I believe in the same context like I just said, Guyana has to establish its independent capacity to monitor oil and gas. And it should not be relying on Exxon. Anytime I think they must be relying on Exxon is when the Exxon preparing the bills for the audit. I've consistently said, concerned that we're not developing the capacity to monitor and audit what is happening. So, in that regard, I think I'm clear. I've said it before. There's one other question. What was it? What's,
Factors for ring fencing.
oh, look, ring fencing, in my opinion, has its value. For instance, if you look at a project and you're satisfied that cost from one is going to the other, then ring fencing will be useful. And so that is why we said in principle, we agree with ring fencing. But what happens if you have a project? And if you ring fence, it might stop investment by the nature of the project. Then one will have to look at other means of dealing with the issue. Like I said in the last press conference, these things are not static, they are dynamic. They operate at different levels of the evolution of the oil and gas sector. And therefore, it is in that context I said, well, we agree in principle. We have to look at the specificities rather than deal with everything based on generalities.
Thank you.
You have what?
All right, let me,
Timeline for what?
how long it would take to go through the specifics.
So,
I, one of the important things that we need to stress, which I think is not too clear on this issue, is that we've been calling for access to data regarding all of the offshore operations. The government has not been willing to provide data, detailed data regarding each of the wells. Now, that is obviously going to be something we would have to look closely at if we're going to consider the issue of ring fencing. One of the reasons that we say that when in office we will review this data and that we will seek expert advice is because we want to ensure that it is clear what the correct path forward is. Leader just mentioned that we don't want to dissuade investors, especially if we're looking at circumstances where ring fencing is not appropriate. But in order for us to really be able to put forward a final position and to approach this issue, we'll need access to that data. And to that end, that's why we've been calling for access to data. Now, of course, we can have an idea of the size of wells and so on based on general releases, but that's not sufficient data. We need a bit more information as to the specific nature of these wells, and that will assist very much in terms of making that determination. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to build on is as it concerns several issues when it comes to the meters for the oil and gas, for the oil production. When it comes to the compensation for auditors, we know that auditors need to be better compensated within the GRA and that we need to attract auditors. When it comes to other governance reforms for the oil and gas sector, when it comes to ensuring we have adequate staff, adequate expertise, these are all things that we've been talking about for some time and that any reasonable government would be including in their national budget. And so we expect to see that these are the types of things that are put forward. If the government is at all serious when it talks about governance in Guyana, we expect to see that governance appropriately funded. It would be beyond belief for us to go another year without having secured meters, having secured the appropriate compensation for GRA auditors, having secured some of the other things that we've spoken about. This cannot continue when, as the government continues to looks to put forward a larger budget, it can't be that they can't find space within that budget to appropriately deal with these issues. Really, the only interpretation that I think Guyanese can carry away from that is that they do not want to appropriately deal with these issues. That is really, I think, the question that should be asked. That is not all data that is required. There's also a question as to the complexity of the wells and as to the nature of the deposits. We need access to additional information to get a sense of how that will impact things going forward. In order for us to get a holistic understanding of what's going on with these wells, we need access to additional data. Until we get access to that and until we can refer that to the appropriate experts to help us to get a deeper understanding of what is going on with that, we would have to continue to evaluate. So what we're saying is that ring fencing is something that we're looking at, but it's not a hard and fast approach. Rather, it is dependent upon getting access to more information.
I want to also indicate some people seem to believe that they are experts on these issues. Our approach is slightly different. We are in a country in which we are not 5 years into oil and gas. So whether we like it or not, we lack the technical capabilities. What we need to be focusing on is building the technical capabilities, look at options, and then decide what options, having engaged experts. It is easy to say do one, do two, without looking at the consequences, without the expert knowledge. As leader of the opposition, I believe that you should rely on expert knowledge. If you're dealing with foreign affairs, you should rely on expert knowledge. If you deal with an engineering matter, you must rely on expert knowledge. It is easy to sound high flown in language, but when it comes to the technicalities and the vicissitudes of these things, we need to develop our capacity. We need to have expert assistance and develop the infrastructure necessary to ensure our people benefit from oil and gas. There are a lot of people in the country who would say they're oil and gas specialists. That might be true in terms of training, but in terms of experience, we are a new nation. We have to look at the experiences. We have to look at the experiences of others and seek to learn from those experiences while engaging people who can help us to ensure we run a successful oil and gas sector.
Thank you. I see the hand of Miss Rennie. Right. Mr. Shabral, let me see if I'm hearing you, and then I'll go back to Rennie. Mr. Shabral, speak again. Let me see if I can hear you. Okay, I guess I'll get it.
Yes, I'm saying that we could have barely heard Mr. Norton just now. Either his mic is off or there is some other problem with the audio system.
All right, we're hearing you clearly.
Oh, so off, right? So something is going on here.
All right, are you hearing me better now?
So I do that.
All right, you can go ahead.
Mr. Norton, my questions are, what the year tech technologies? And secondly, did you approach the various decisions?
Well, well, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about when it comes to figuring engagement with government and contracts. I've had no discussion on that and don't know anything about it. So that's the answer to the first one. The, the Human Rights Commission, once the government is ready, we will submit our names to the Commission. Let us not forget that we he submitted the representative for the one of the investment committee of the Natural Resource Fund. And up until today, he has not been appointed, though I personally reminded the minister of with responsibility for finance that we had submitted the name of someone and he undertook to act on it. Up until now, no action has been taken. But we will address this question of the Human Rights Commission and have our names available.
Well, is there a procedure for your Parliament or shadow cabinet members to seek assistance from the government? What is your procedure?
I don't know I don't know what you mean by seek assistance. The functions of members of parliament are clear and document. When I became leader, I sat with the members of parliament and we all agree, I think the 13 or 14 things members of parliament should be doing. I don't know what you mean by seek assistance, but it is the task of all members of parliament to represent their constituency. I can give you a practical example. I wouldn't give you the details. A citizen of Linden engaged me on a matter involving the police. And as opposition leader, I engaged the Minister of Home Affairs, and we have engaged with the aim of resolving it. I call that representation. Our task is to represent people's interests, and we do that. When I was Shadow Minister, Housing and Water, when I was an MP, I represented people on that issue. Robert Prasad will tell you that on many occasions I wrote him on issues in agriculture, representing people. And so if you're talking about representation, you understand, if you're talking about seeking contracts, etc., that's a totally different ball game. I think the law specifies how you should deal with contracts, etc., and no member of parliament has asked me anything about permission to go get contracts, etc. So that element I don't know, but what I do know, all members of parliament are entitled to represent their constituency, represent people on matters that they need representation. And I will always be happy if there is representation, because I see no problem. You are elected to represent people. That is distinct and different from the language you would have used.
Thank you.
Should from you or the wider shadow cabinet to make representation on your supporters?
That is almost self-evident. How do you be the representative of your people and don't make representation? What I'm saying to you is that they are entitled to make representation. But I was very careful because the language you use suggested something different.
Or permission or the need to consult first with you or the shadow cabinet before making representation, or they can do it with their own and come back and inform you and the wider shadow cabinet.
It is not something you could say either or. There are some matters will never arrive at the level that you want to discuss it in a shadow cabinet. All right. A man from Linden called me making an allegation that the police took away his gold. Do I have to wait on a shadow cabinet meeting to call the Minister of Home Affairs? No. I engaged him. I give him the facts. It's dealing with the matter. So there will be issues which sometimes are more than just simple representation that you might need to engage on. MPs have got to be responsible, and there's a certain amount of latitude for you to seek representation. But you said, for instance, seeking contracts. I mean, I don't know that it's the responsibility of a member of parliament to seek contracts for anybody. However, if a person is discriminated against, they know they're entitled to the contract, you can give advice. I've advised many people that, look, what has happened there is wrong, you need to do X, Y, and Z. But I do not know of a situation where I have to approve or will ever approve member parliament going asking the PPP government for contract. That to me is not their function. Their function is representation of people, representing people's interests, and where people's interests need to be represented, then as a member of parliament, you represent them. There are many members of parliament who will ask me for advice, and I will give advice. But I do not believe that on every issue that a member of parliament has to run and come and ask permission to represent somebody in some area. That to me doesn't make any sense. And I could tell you under my tenure, it has not happened where in representing somebody, they have to come to find out if they could or could not. Like I said, if it is a bigger issue and it has implications for the wider, we call it, I see very much that you can operate as a responsible, independent, matured person.
Mr. Shabrala, I want to make a broader point on this question of contracts. We've seen recently a controversy regarding the Akamai company and the Public Procurement Commission. We're looking at this closely because we want to ensure that Guyanese have confidence in our institutions to protect them when they raise concerns about about the justification for the award of contracts. And it is especially important given the government is going to put forward yet another budget that is sure going to have substantial amounts of infrastructure and other spending. There's a saying that justice must not just be done, it must be seen to be done. And it is vital that Guyanese have confidence in their institutions. We want to ensure that Guyanese always believe that they can go to the Public Procurement Commission over anything. And we want the Public Procurement Commission to be not just looking at issues on a surface level, but to be making use of its powers, constitutional powers, to the fullest extent that it can. It is given a wide mandate by the Constitution to act. And given some of the complaints that have been put forward, we would also expect the Commission to be looking at what are the procedures that MPTAB and other procuring agencies have regarding how they handle documentation, because there's an allegation that documentation was submitted. And of course, MPTAB is saying that wasn't the case. So that, I believe, is warrants review. And of course, it is under the Public Procurement Commission's remit to look at the procurement system in Guyana more broadly. So that's one thing that is an issue that needs to be, that further attention needs to be paid to. That's one of the first things that I want to note. The second is, we would have mentioned that we made our submission regarding the Natural Resources Fund Investment Committee. One of the things, though, that this I think brings up is you have, of course, many in the media would have observed the Vice President making a lot of remarks regarding the question of the interest that is earned on the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the capacity to pay public servants a substantial increase from that. Now, it seems to me that in an attempt to dodge this question of whether or not public servants can be paid a large increase, the Vice President has gone and talked about the wrong year. I spoke about 2023. He's speaking about 2022, and has sought to hide behind the legislation which they themselves have passed, and therefore they themselves can adjust. But more broadly, it seemed to some people that the Vice President was not really keeping track of the interest that was earned from the NRF, and that is not something that he really wants to talk about. Now, that is not a tenable position at all, because probably for the next 100 years, Guyanese will be talking about the interest that is earned on that sovereign wealth fund, because it will have a substantial impact on how we fund our budgets as time goes on. In fact, Norway, 20 to 25%, a large chunk of their budget is funded just from the interest that they earn. So if the Vice President doesn't want to engage on the interest earned from the NRF, that's up to him. But it will mean that he will be less and less relevant to discussions in this country on the financing of the budget going forward.
Hi everyone. Mr. Norton, you spoke of the auto mining sector. Are you saying that Mr. Patterson failed to address those issues? And my second question, were you not pleased with the comments made by Patterson relative to the oil and gas sector?
Now, yes, I am aware of the comments made, and I Patterson's comment on ring fencing as anything different to what I said. He said yes, they should be ring fencing. I said we agree in principle, they should be ring fencing, but we have to look at the specificities. Now, if you would listen to me, I didn't say anything about competence or lack of competence. I said Patterson was put back in infrastructure because he has the institutional knowledge. He was the person who actually spearheaded infrastructure public works development under us. And I thought it did not make sense for him to be in another portfolio. And then when you need direct answers from the shadow minister, somebody else is doing it. And so in the circumstance, I recognize that Patterson has expertise in oil and gas, which we needed. But he is au fait more than any one of us, including Ejil, as to what has happened, is happening, and should happen. And therefore, in my opinion, he's best suited to lead us in public works, while at the same time having the authority to deal with oil and gas matters. I don't know how any word about competence emerged. That was the explanation I gave. And those are the factors. I want to say to you, the changes that have been made are made at improving the work of the opposition members of parliament and ensuring that we deliver representation to the people. And I do believe that at this stage, with the incompetence of Ramsey, with the amount of things that are happening, we needed an activist-oriented person. And Nima Flubes has shown that she's activist-oriented. Additionally, it must be noted that she's qualified in sport. She actually was involved in sport, still involved in sport at school, and has the kind of contacts that will allow her to be effective as a shadow minister, youth, sport, and culture.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Timor King.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, this is Kamal King with Parliamentary. I would like to follow up Mr. Lowe's question, answer on something before I go to my substantive question. On the matter of ring fencing, you talked about leading information on the complexity of the wells. I didn't really understand what information specifically that should be. When we talk about ring fencing, it's really a financial question. So I'm wondering, what does the complexity of the wells have to do with the matter of ring fencing?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kemal. The complexity of a well will impact the cost of the well. The cost of the well will impact an investor's decision regarding the well. So we need to get additional information so that we can have a sense of how investors will look at different well prospects, and therefore whether ring fencing will impact their investment decisions negatively or positive, or not cause an impact. Therefore, we need access to that information, but also the appropriate expertise to be able to guide us as we make that evaluation.
I would like to ask Mr. Norton, who are you considering for Mr. Patterson's replacement on the oil and gas front, and what are the things that you think qualifies those considerations to represent this portfolio? I just also like to say, when you mention your views as opposed to Patterson's views on ring fencing, I don't think that they are the same. Mr. Patterson says decisively that ring fencing should be implemented, and you say, oh, we need to get the data, and your perspective is less decisive. Would you say that his more maybe black and white views on the question of ring fencing and renegotiation, differing from your more measured or nuanced views, also influence your decision to remove him from the portfolio of oil and gas?
I don't know about removing him from any portfolio of oil and gas. If you speak with any member of parliament, they would know since last budget, Patterson was dealing with infrastructure, public works. What is public works? Now, I did say then, and I'm saying now, that Patterson continues to deal with oil and gas. I think the mistake you're making is you are equating natural resources with oil and gas. Oil and gas is only one element of natural resources. And there are a number of MPs, at least 2 or 3 of them, who are dealing with oil and gas. Now, as it relates to the natural resource shadow minister, it is Sherwin Holder, who is an engineer by profession and competent. And therefore, in addition to which, he sits on our party oil and gas committee. He engages the expert. But I wanted to be made very clear. He is not shadow minister oil and gas. He is shadow minister natural resources, of which oil and gas is one. Bauxite will be one. Gold and diamond, forestry would be one. We should not get caught in this trap of over-focusing on the oil and gas and leave the others to go in any direction. The decision is aimed at ensuring a holistic approach is taken to natural resources while having people specifically focus on oil and gas. In this regard, Patterson continues to be a key person. We have advisors outside of this body, and I am aware that Patterson is in contact with the people that advise. And so, for me, it's simple. You place him at infrastructure. I don't think anybody can challenge his competence in infrastructure. I don't think anybody can challenge his plans. And the best person to promote it and defend those plans in the parliament is David Patterson. And I have rectified that problem by making him Shadow Minister, Public Works. But Annette Ferguson was in Public Works. She is doing housing and water, and she is also still entitled, and I made this clear in the document I produced last year for budget and the one that will be released either today or tomorrow, that she also will look at the question of public works because she has the institutional knowledge. Now, Erin Cummins is looking at health. She was in the Ministry of Health. Valda Lawrence came in, and one area of her responsibility is health. But only one person could be the shadow minister. And that is where it is.
Follow up that. According to a Kaiser News report today, it says Patterson said he was not informed of a reason for the shift. So with this in mind, what I wanted to understand is because the article speaks a lot about Mr. Patterson saying that you, Mr. Norton, spoke to Mr. Ramjitan about your concerns about comments made by Patterson on certain oil and gas matters.
Patterson said that, but I didn't see that, and that didn't occur. I didn't see those comments. And Mr. Ramjitan could tell you, I had no discussion as far as I'm aware with him about what Patterson said on oil and gas. Some of these things seems to be figment of people's imagination. But I can tell you from a factual standpoint, I did not raise that issue with Mr. Ramjitan. And as it relates to Patterson, if you want, Mr. Patterson could tell you, I spoke to him at least twice last year about why I think he should be in public works, even though he deals with oil and gas. So I didn't see these articles that you're talking about and these comments. But if they did emerge, I would say to you, I don't recall doing any of that is suggested there. And may I also say this to you? One of the MPs who I would call regularly and would call me regularly is David Patterson.
Question from Mr. Hubert, then I'll come back in studio and then go to Mr. Adam Harris as we begin to wrap up. So,
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me first of all?
yes, we are hearing you, but we're getting a bit of a feedback.
How about now?
Yes.
Over Kaiser News. Mr. Norton's position on the returns ExxonMobil is recovering on investment slash equity that underpin these capital block projects. Has the opposition ever asked the parent company guarantee Exxon said it lodged?
Position ever? I think if you go back to your own records, you will see it. We did say in the public domain that it should be done. You can.
Yes, absolutely. We've been, I think, very clear on that particular issue for some time now, especially with regard to the judge's ruling on that particular issue. As it regards the returns, I believe you're saying the returns on investment and the returns on equity. I think it's what you said regarding Exxon's investment here in Guyana. Investors across the world will obviously be looking to make an appropriate return. We don't really think we should be commenting on the specific return that an investor is receiving. Rather, more generally, we have said that we will always seek the best for Guyanese from any operations that are taking place in Guyana from any investor. And to that end, we've said that we're going to ensure that we work along with the operator to provide the best for Guyanese. We've already demonstrated that we're willing to speak to the operator regarding ensuring that Guyanese receive the most. But we must also point out that that also means that we need to have appropriate auditing so that Guyanese are receiving what they're due. So this is not an issue where we want to make a specific comment, but to reiterate our general approach regarding this particular issue.
Thank you. I take the question from Ms.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Norton, just for clarification, just for clarity, sir, did you consult with all the MPs, opposition MPs who would have been affected as a result of this reshuffling exercise? Are you saying that you've consulted all of them before taking those decisions? My second question has to do with elections 2025, the party's preparation for those elections, and how would you rate your performance as the leader of the PNCR as well as the leader of the opposition since you've taken office? And my final question has to do with preparation for Congress. I know it was said that Congress would be held no later than August. Could you say if preparations are on the way?
Well, the time we will inform you about the Congress in preparation. To talk about election 2025, we are not buying Jack Dew's propaganda. One of the things politicians like Jack Dew do is put a date and then come out of the blues and say we want it earlier. So we are preparing for elections whenever. As it relates to rating myself as opposition leader or as leader of the PNCR, I don't want to be involved in saying whether I did well or bad. The people will decide. The party will hold its Congress, and then when it happens, you could decide whether a good job as leader of the PNC. What I can say to you is that the mass of the party and our support base seem happy with what I'm doing, and there will always be those who are unhappy. in speaking with MPs throughout the process on different issues. Um, every other Tuesday, I will learn from what they say. I don't want to get into which MP I've spoken to about performance, etc. I don't think it's something that I should put in the public domain. But I have spoken to MPs on the question of performance. I've given guidance to MPs on these issues.
A very good morning, everyone. This is related to the budget. Has the opposition consulted in the preparation of budget 2024, as has been the has been acting in the past? Have you been made aware of the contents of the budget? For example, I have learned that the budget for GCOM has been slashed, and this will impact things like house-to-house registration and biometrics. Have you, back to the original thing, have you been consulted?
The answer to it is no, I have not been consulted. But I am aware that the budget was slashed. And I would have looked at the reasons why I thought it would have been slashed. One, it could have been slashed because the government doesn't want to have biometric and house-to-house registration. That could be one reason. The other reason could be to place us into a sense of complacency. There's no money in there to run elections. Elections are going to be held 2024. Now, that could be Jack Dale's strategy. Now, we in the opposition know that they just pass a budget and then come with supplementary budgets that are, so we wouldn't fall into that trap. So I'm saying to you essentially that there are some possibilities of why it was cut. One is probably the desire not to have biometrics in here. The other one is to lull us into a sense, into complacency, so that when they act, they catch us off guard. That wouldn't happen. I know they are reeling from the fact that in the local government we were saying we're not going, etc. And then when we decided they were going, they'd already forged all the people's signature so that they could have gotten representative in various areas. And when they recognized that we were going, then they had to scramble to try and make changes, etc. Look, if it is one thing I will always do, is everything Barry Jack Dale says, I will analyze the wickedness in it. I've done that already.
Triana Williams is there as we wrap up today.
Mr. Norton, just a follow-up to Mr. Adams' question on the elections. Given that all that took place in 2020, the opposition or APNU expressing their lack of confidence in the Elections Commission, since then, not much would have changed. The party would have lobbied for a new list, what you call the National Register of Registrants. That has not been altered in any particular way with respect to what the party would have been for. How confident then is the APNU AFC or the APNU heading into those elections? And do you expect any major change ahead of 2025 or whatever elections are called?
Well, we hope that they will give us a clean voters list and biometrics. But as a political party, you have to prepare for every possibility, and that is what we will.
Yes.
This question is for Ms. The opposition has been critical of the government for not yet removing the tuition fee as usual. But these comments have been met with criticisms. And instead, remove the deposit clear cash grants, increase the tuition fees, and place VAT on education, among other stuff. Despite promising to make education more accessible, promising, why did the coalition not address this from 2015 to 2020 and instead increase the cost to access education? I have two other questions after that, but Mr. Norton, can you please answer?
Simple and straightforward. We didn't have oil. Now there is oil. We can afford it. So I want to go back. Free education came to this country without oil, under Forbes burner. The PPP removed it in 1994, I think it was. And so when we took over, you were paying. I make the assumption that the university had to meet its costs, and so there were slight increases. But it didn't change the fact, and it will not change the fact, that we are committed to free education as a constitutional requirement. And it would not change the fact that the circumstance now is totally different, and there are oil and gas, that there are resources coming from oil and gas that we can use to give our people free education. Not only free education at the University of Ghana, but I still believe we should have continued to fund the lawyers, because what is happening in the society, he who has money can become a lawyer, and he who doesn't might be brighter than those who have money. And so I think it should be extended to those areas of studies, because you will always need lawyers. And I think you have the resources, we should do it. And more resources should be put into the University of Ghana. Though I know the government doesn't want to do that, because the more skilled people you have is the less space for PPP cronies without certificates. And they love that.
Just to build on that, you know, one of the things we always want to point out to the Guyanese, and we mentioned it in today's press release, is that from a few years ago, the national budget has tripled. You know, in fact, last year is in excess of $900 billion of spending. That 1 year's worth of spending is equivalent to 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014 budgets all put together. And, you know, they still couldn't find a few billion to make the University of Ghana free. That they can't make it free. They don't want to make it free. They should just come out and say that. They've never had any interest in the university. That's point number one. Point number two, we're not just talking about making the university free. We're talking about investing in the university so that it can reach its full potential and support the Guyanese economy. So it goes far beyond just making the university free. We also believe that we have to write off student debts that are existing there. So it is not for us, as we previously mentioned, political football to put back and forth, but it is something that we take very seriously.
I should say that we are indeed happy that I hear the president is saying that they will get rid of the student loans. We have been saying that all the time. And if they do it, we welcome it, because it's a relief for the students.
Questions? Before you go through the two questions quickly, so we can wrap up.
Martin, outside of what the government has already done to address the rise in cost of living due to global economic conditions, what I'd like to know is what are tangible opposition would propose to address this global phenomenon felt by Guyanese as well.
May I say to you, I don't know what global phenomenon you're talking about impacting our cost of living. Our cost of living increases of reflection of poor planning. We knew the sun was here. We knew the people coming will increase. And we should have known we have to increase food production. I'm talking here just about the food in Guyana. Celery, which we used to be $200, is now $2,000. Now, what did in the last budget presentation I did, I said to the government, you have to increase agriculture generally but you also need to ensure that there is increased agricultural production in regions 1, parts of region 4, which they had neglected and were not doing the backlands so that people could farm, which was done under the APNU. I said to them, you have to ensure there's increased agriculture in region 7, in region 8, region 9, and 10. We went as far as building the road to Millie's Hideout so that the people in the Barbish River could have brought out the produce. The government didn't bother. Now, you have to increase your food production here in Guyana to ensure first security of the food you produce. What is the global impact on that? I don't know that there is any global impact on that. That is a decision that has to be taken by the government. They have to put the resources in there, put agricultural extension officers in those communities, help prepare the land, the drainage and irrigation so that our agriculture production can increase rather than some of the nonsense you hear coming out of the agriculture minister. So I don't know that it is any global phenomenon that is affecting the price of celery in Guyana. I don't know how is it that it is affecting the price of plantain. If it could be illustrated with me, to me, I would like to see it. We have allowed increase in persons in the society without planning the increased production to ensure we can satisfy those needs. And basic economics will tell you where there is scarcity, the price will go up. And if you increase agriculture and there is plenty, the price is likely to go down or stabilize.
One of the other things to mention on this front is that the quality of your governance when it comes to managing inflation is quite vital. Now, there are some other factors that affect prices, but you'll observe that as the US government has indicated, Guyana's inflation rate was 6.6%, but the US inflation rate last year, the US inflation rate was much lower than Guyana's. One of the things we really need to have Guyanese to be clear on is the rate of inflation and high costs are often related to the price of oil. As an oil producer, we will typically have a windfall when you have high prices, especially in relation to oil. So we have additional revenues available to cushion the impact. Just because there is inflation somewhere in the world doesn't mean Guyana has to have inflation. And duly, what you've seen in the US is that President Biden managed the release of their reserves of oil to help to moderate the global oil price and to moderate inflation. So you can take good efforts as a government with access to oil revenues, as an oil producer, to deal with the effect. It's that the PPP has not been taking efforts to deal with that. And as a result, we are doing much worse than we should really be doing.
Question is, Mr. Norton, I know you spoke extensively on why you reshuffled some of your MPs, but what I want to ask is, why did you take so long to reshuffle?
All I would say to you, this whole thing is not an event, it's a process. You have to assess, you have to look at where the problems were, and then you time when you make the changes. The truth of the matter is, last budget, many of the persons that spoke, for instance, Patterson, spoke as shadow minister, public works. So it wasn't an event. But the key thing that had informed what I was doing was my big worry that we had placed some of our members of parliament without institutional knowledge in areas where we had people in the parliament with institutional knowledge. And therefore, I thought we needed to rectify that. And over a period, by overlapping and having a number of people deal with a number of issues, we have arrived at the point where we can now make the changes and move forward. but it wasn't an event. It was a process. For instance, while Kemraj Ramjitan was Shadow Minister Agriculture, in the last budget, we put Vince Roy Jordan to shadow. And personally, I had spoke with him and said, look, you need to monitor agriculture because you're heading in that direction. Because I felt you had to put Kemraj in Home Affairs so he could handle the matters in Home Affairs. And I could go through it with all of them, but I've given enough on it.
Thank you very in person and those who would have joined on the Zoom. Our viewers on our social media platform do have a wonderful afternoon.